Hey guys, tonight we will venture into the underworld of an empress who transformed the very depths of suffering into a weapon of power, unmatched by any, where the gilded corridors of the Byzantine Empire conceal secrets so terrifying they could make even the senators tremble. From debauched stages to a resplendent throne, the journey of Theodora Augusta is a story of dramatic metamorphosis, where humiliation was forged into ambition and desire became the map guiding her to supreme authority. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what the local time is. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Theodora Augusta was born in the year 500 Anno Domini into a poor family on the shores of the Bosphorus. In the magnificent city of Constantinople, her father, Acacius, was an ordinary labourer responsible for carrying loads for the Blues faction at the Hippodrome, the place where the thunder of hooves sounded like the whispered promises of fate. Her mother died not long after Acacius passed away, leaving Theodora with her two elder sisters and a young brother in their ramshackle home. The cries of infants mingled with the scent of olive oil and the sweat of their foster mother. These were the only memories Theodora retained of the fragile warmth of family. When her father suddenly died, all hope turned to ashes. She and her sisters wandered through the Hippodrome's cold stone tiers, where distinctions between patricians and plebeians vanished. The Blues, once the family's protector, had turned away after accepting promises and bribes from the Reds, refusing to acknowledge Acacius's heirs. Thus, Theodora and her sisters were cast into destitution, their empty hands with nothing to grasp but the dim lanterns illuminating the margins of the stage. From the age of 15, according to the ruthless historian Procopius, Theodora became a star of the most depraved erotic plays Constantinople had ever witnessed, clad only in a slender ribbon. Her body bore the weight of countless barley grains scattered across her skin, which flocks of geese pecked away an obscene parody of the swan's dance. Senators, wealthy merchants, and foreign envoys watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as the spectacle repeated night after night. A painful destiny from which she could not escape. Furthermore, Procopius recorded that on a single night, Theodora served dozens of prisoners and merchants before turning to their exhausted servants. Although Procopius's account was harsh, many ancient sources confirm the existence of these ruthless performances. In those most agonizing moments, Theodora learned a bitter lesson. Flesh is currency, desire is weakness, and whoever controls pleasure seizes power. The deeper she delved into this underworld, the more keenly she observed the workings of authority. She perceived the profound anxiety in powerful men's eyes, the fear of exposed sins, the dread of shattered reputations. She memorized every detail, the false smiles before the crowds, the trembling hands lifting goblets, the weary sighs after the final curtain. Every secret, every vice of the wealthy became priceless treasure in her mind. That harsh childhood did not crush Theodora's spirit. Instead, it forged her into someone acutely sensitive to the dramas of power. When night fell and the pale moonlight played upon Byzantine rooftops, she would shudder and vow never to remain a victim. Quietly, she recorded her observations in a thin notebook, the shaky letters seeming to mourn alongside her fate, so that one day, if given the chance, she could use that hard-won knowledge to alter her destiny. Yet deep within, Theodora still carried the scars of those long nights of humiliation. Whenever she thought of her fragmented family, she wondered how her sisters fared, and whether her little brother had escaped to some distant refuge. Those memories tangled around her heart like threads. Yet they also drove her upward, compelling her to transform suffering into strength. From that mire of degradation, a legend began to take shape. The poor girl who became a consummate performer of the most shameful theatre, a student of the powerful mind, an acute observer of every gesture among the elite. Those sleepless nights by the flickering candlelight were not merely nightmares, but furnaces, forging her survival instincts. Theodora understood that only by mastering information could she turn herself from a drifting commodity into the weaver of power's tapestry. And that was only the beginning. As dawn's first light filtered through silk drapes, Theodora lifted her head, her eyes glistening with the promise of tomorrow. She whispered to herself that fate was but a play, waiting for its director. With intellect, cunning, and the memory of her pain, she would write the next chapter, not as a victim, but as an empress upon a dazzling throne, one that few would dare to dream of. After many years of suffering, Theodora became the mistress of Hyblis, the governor of Syria at Pentapolis, and lived in North Africa for 4 years. On sun-warmed afternoons at the port of Carthage, she watched the sailing ships unfurl their canvases, carrying dreams of freedom she had never dared to imagine. Yet Hyblis regarded her only as a temporary plaything. When he grew bored, Theodora was abandoned in Alexandria, amid spice-scented streets and the distant tolling of church bells. With no friends and no money, she wandered through the fish markets and poor labour quarters, scavenging every coin she could find to buy a piece of stale bread or a drop of clean water. During those harsh days, Theodora chanced upon Patriarch Timothy III and the Monophysite community in a humble church on the banks of the Nile. She was drawn to the Patriarch's warm, resonant voice, and to the fervent faith of people who had themselves been scorned. There, Theodora discovered a new strength, spiritual power to heal past wounds, knowledge to see herself as more than mere entertainment, and religious conviction to believe she was worthy of more than a gilded cage. Amid echoing prayers, she quietly learned to read scripture, to expound doctrine, and to maintain calm in the storm of her own thoughts. When she returned to Constantinople in the year 522, Theodora resolved to abandon the debauched stage forever. She chose a humble life, earning her living by spinning wool. Her fingers grew deft, and the plain white yarn became the only thing dyed with her sweat and her dreams. Though the work was grueling, she felt more peaceful than ever, as if cleansed of the countless indignities she had endured. The thin notebook of her former life was hidden away, replaced by pages of prayers and lessons in humility and perseverance. This period of rebirth allowed Theodora to make a powerful impression on Justinian, the imperial heir of Byzantium. She understood that true authority did not spring from fleeting beauty, but from intellect and strategic vision. By secretly appearing in the imperial gardens, Theodora conversed with scholars and privy councillors, bearing skeins of wool and sprigs of vibrant thistle. Occasionally, she exchanged secret letters through trusted messengers, enclosing astonishing accounts of Monophysite worship and treatises on spiritual power. Although the decree forbidding nobles to wed actresses remained in force, Justinian could not tear his eyes away from this resolute woman. The young prince found Theodora's steadfastness and wisdom more captivating than any ornament. They met furtively beneath marble-arched pavilions, where only the breeze rustled the leaves and the scent of incense hung in the air. Justinian was enthralled by her tales of Monophysite liturgies and the faith she had guarded all those years. Each love letter was as formal as a charter, each promise laden with duty and courage. It was her unassuming dignity and profound inner strength that convinced Justinian to take the risk. Despite the court's disapproval, when Emperor Justin breathed his last in the year 527, Justinian ascended the throne without hesitation. He immediately crowned Theodora as empress, placing upon her head a golden diadem and draping her in silken robes. The journey from a reviled girl, denied any claim to power, to a resplendent empress seemed complete. Yet the scars of her past suffering did not fade so easily. They accompanied her into the imperial palace, lurking in the gentle lines upon her brow, ready to flare beneath the new mantle of authority. Now, Theodora was no longer the girl spinning wool by a dim window, but the great empress of the Byzantine Empire. However, The darkness of the hippodrome and the nights upon that debauched stage remained engraved in her soul, preparing her for the next chapter, a chapter of power, of political cunning, and of intricate dramas where past and present would intertwine to forge an enduring legend. Upon ascending the throne as Empress, Theodora did not erase the memory of her deepest humiliations. Instead, she transmuted them into instruments of dominion, in a ritual that sent shivers through the marble halls of the great palace. Her court deputies commanded senators and foreign envoys alike to prostrate themselves before her. They knelt on plush velvet cushions, their proud voices reduced to whispered supplications as they bent to kiss her feet upon the golden dais. It was a deliberate inversion of the very spectacles of subjugation she had once endured in the hippodrome, a quiet but unmistakable declaration. She who had been forced to serve the mob would now be revered by the mightiest in the realm. This ceremony, repeated at dusk, when the fading light cast long shadows across the throne room, became both a show of submission and a test of loyalty. Those who hesitated even for a heartbeat found themselves quietly removed from favour, their names erased from court records, their fortunes quietly confiscated. Theodora's new spy network, woven with careful precision through every level of Byzantine society, included many of the women who had shared her past degradations. These informants, formerly entertainers, courtesans, and servants, moved like whispering phantoms through palaces and private residences. They reported rumours of dissent, secret alliances plotted in candle-lit chambers, and the most delicate intimacies of aristocratic liaisons. In the hush between prayers and policy sessions, Theodora learned who plotted rebellion, who coveted her influence, and who clung to dangerous hopes of overthrow. Meanwhile, within the opulent walls of the Palace of Hormistas, Theodora fashioned a realm of forbidden delights that few outsiders glimpsed. Mirrors lined vaulted corridors, reflecting endless candles and marble statues that seemed to shift in the flickering light. Exquisite perfumes ambergris, saffron, rose distilled in water, from distant gardens hung in the air, weaving an intoxicating haze that lulled visitors into a state of relaxed euphoria. In secluded chambers, dancers cloaked in diaphanous silks performed languid movements to the soft plucking of lyres. Beautiful youths, chosen for their delicate features, attended gently, offering wine and platters of spiced fruits. No formal records describe these gatherings. They existed in whispers and coded schedules among trusted courtiers. Yet they served a vital purpose under the guise of pleasure. Theodora gleaned slivers of truth from those who believed their secrets would remain safe. At the same time, she established what became known as the Convent of Repentance, ostensibly a sanctuary for women seeking to escape lives of forced servitude and exploitation. High atop a tranquil hill overlooking the Golden Horn, the convent's whitewashed walls and cloistered gardens offered the promise of redemption. Women rescued from brothels and lowly stages were welcomed within its gates, their heads bowed in gratitude as they donned simple grey robes and took vows of penance. But the convent's gates did not truly open to the outside world. Theodora's keepers enforced strict schedules, hours of prayer at dawn and dusk, days filled with manual labour, weeks spent in silent contemplation, while they were safe from the cruelty of the streets. These women found themselves confined by unseen chains of discipline. Some, unable to bear the double bind of salvation and imprisonment, chose to end their lives rather than endure the hollow embrace of enforced penance. Theodora watched these tragedies from her private window, her expression inscrutable, as if weighing each soul's worth against the needs of the empire. On the legal front, Theodora championed sweeping reforms purportedly designed to uplift women's status. She advocated for laws granting women the right to initiate divorce, and expanded inheritance rights for daughters, and stiffened penalties for sexual violence. Publicly, these measures marked a bold stand against the abuses she had known firsthand. However, in private, she wielded these very statutes as weapons against political adversaries, False accusations of illicit affairs or coerced liaisons, presented before sympathetic judges. I could ruin a man's reputation overnight. A single whispered rumor of impropriety was enough to spark an inquiry, during which seized documents and coerced testimonies became ammunition in her campaign of eradication. In Theodora's hands, the shame associated with sexual scandal proved more potent than any sword or spear, for it could leave its victims paralyzed by fear, their families stripped of honor, their names consigned to the darkest margins of history. Yet Theodora understood that true power required more than fear alone. It demanded reverence born of myth. By day, she presided over councils in rich brocade, her calm voice issuing decrees that balanced mercy with ruthless efficiency. By night, through the veiled artistry of her spies and the silent corridors of her pleasure palace, she sculpted the empire according to her will. What began as a reign shadowed by personal trauma evolved into a mastery of statecraft. Forged in the crucible of humiliation and ambition, in the soft glow of morning light, she would reflect upon her journey from the grime of Constantinople's underbelly to the apex of imperial authority, knowing that every shiver of submission and every trembling confession had been transformed into threads of power in her sweeping tapestry of rule. In the year 532, the Nika revolt erupted like a storm at sea, its thunderous cries threatening to tear the Byzantine throne from Justinian's grasp. Factions of blues and greens, once rivals in the hippodrome's chariot races, united in fury and marched upon the imperial palace, their shouts echoing through marble corridors. As the city teetered on the brink of collapse and the heavens darkened with smoke from burning houses, courtiers urged the imperial couple to flee under the cover of night. Yet it was Theodora who rose above their pleas, her voice steady and unwavering as she faced the fearful council. "Purple is the finest shroud," she declared, her words cutting through the panic like a blade. In that moment, she refused to become a fugitive, choosing instead to stand her ground and fight for her husband's legacy. By dawn's pale light, the streets were stained with the blood of rebels, Justinian's generals, under Theodora's command, funneled loyal troops into the hippodrome, the very arena where she had once knelt in humiliation. There, between the grandstands where senators had cheered and foreigners had watched in morbid fascination, more than 30,000 insurrectionists met their end. The sands of the chariot track drank deeply of vengeance, turning a stage of sport into an altar of retribution. As the clamour of steel and dying cries faded, a hush fell across Constantinople. Theodora, standing upon her dais in the imperial box, watched the final echoes of revolt dissipate like ghosts at dawn. In that crimson moment, the circle of her life closed. She who had been degraded before the masses now loomed over them as both sovereign and executioner. In the aftermath of the Nika massacre, Theodora withdrew deeper into enigma. She embraced a regimen of peculiar beauty rituals that blurred the line between devotion to appearance and the trappings of power. Each morning, her attendants guided her through baths, enriched with warmed milk, scented oils distilled from distant lands, and petals of rare flowers that drifted upon the steam. She slept until the sun had climbed high, often not rising until midday, her bed draped in layers of silk dyed in the richest purples. Audiences with petitioners were severely limited, granted only in fleeting glimpses through latticed screens. Many chroniclers of the age, puzzled by these eccentricities, labelled her behaviour a sign of mental affliction, while others whispered that it was a calculated assertion of control, forcing the machinery of court to revolve at her leisure. Yet these outward oddities were but one facet of Theodora's grand design. She twisted and remade the norms of gender within the court to reinforce her dominion. Male dignitaries, once symbols of masculine authority, were ordered to don silk so fine that the fabric clung like a second skin. Their robes shimmered with embroidery, in hues of rose and pale jade, and they were compelled to apply kohl to their eyelids, lending their eyes a deliberate softness. Each man's appearance became a performance, a mirror held up to the shifted power dynamics that Theodora had engineered. Meanwhile, she surrounded herself with women of prowess, female generals trained in martial disciplines and counsel, lady magistrates, versed in law and administration. In Theodora's court, the line between man and woman blurred, exposing gender as nothing more than a theatre mask, a tool she wielded to subdue and mesmerize. Through these deliberate reversals, Theodora proclaimed a profound truth. Identity is a role to be played, and power resides in the ability to script that performance. The men of the empire, clad in fragility and wearing makeup, became living testaments to her authority, while her cadre of warrior women and jurists embodied her redefinition of strength. In every whispered corridor and candlelit council chamber, the courtiers understood that to challenge Theodora was to challenge the very fabric of reality she had so meticulously woven. Thus, in the quiet hours before sleep, when the city's candles guttered low and the distant hum of night winds stirred the silk drapes, Theodora's transformation stood complete, no longer merely the girl who had survived degradation. She had become architect of a new world, one in which the past served as both a warning and a weapon, where the rituals of beauty and the pageantry of gender were levers of control. In the land of Byzantium, her reign would be remembered not only for the bloodshed in the hippodrome, but also for the silent power of subversion that reshaped an empire's soul. And as the moon cast its silver glow upon the marble fountains of the palace gardens, Theodora Augusta reclined upon her chaise, her gaze distant, dreaming of the next act in the grand drama she alone could direct. Theodora and her trusted advisor Antonina herself, no stranger to scandal, devised webs of intrigue that ensnared their political rivals in the most intimate of snares. They selected bewitching courtesans and demure pages, training them in the subtle art of seduction, the gentle brush of a fingertip, the whispered promise behind veiled lips. Each confidant of the court senators accustomed to public displays of power, generals hardened by battlefield triumphs, and even high-ranking bishops cloaked in ecclesiastical authority found themselves laid bare before Theodora's cunning agents. In dimly lit chambers, these chosen ones coaxed whispered desires from their targets, memorizing every furtive glance, every mortal craving that lurked behind rhetorical facades. Antonina kept meticulous charts of each man's proclivities, a fondness for rare incense, a weakness for honeyed wine, a hidden penchant for velvet whispers at midnight. These records, bound in subdued leather and locked away in the imperial treasury, became weapons sharper than any sword. Once the dossiers overflowed with salutations of sin, Theodora acted with quiet precision. At a costumed banquet beneath vaulted mosaics, she might invite a prominent patrician to confess his secret inclinations over ivory goblets of perfumed wine. When the unsuspecting noble professed his appetite for clandestine trysts, Theodora, satirically tender, would present him with a mirror and a sentence: "Reflect upon your own desires. For public virtue demand private chastity." The room, filled with courtiers attired in muted silks, would fall silent. The humiliation, skillfully orchestrated, crushed any ember of resistance. In the corridors afterward, whispers of his confession circulated like a plague, tainting his reputation beyond repair. Thus did Theodora transform private weaknesses into public downfall, ensuring that no adversary dared breathe a whisper of dissent. At the heart of her inner circle stood the eunuchs chosen, castrated, and raised by Theodora's own hand. These men, neither wholly male nor female, possessed no carnal desires to distract them. Their loyalty was absolute, their service untainted by personal ambition. Witnesses recall the rite of transformation, held within a sanctum of marble and flickering lamp oil. There, young pages, once full-blooded lads of promise, underwent the irrevocable ceremony. Their bodies, once instruments of desire, were laid upon marble slabs, as Theodora observed, Soft laughter of her chosen attendants mingled with the antiseptic scent of pumice and crushed rose petals. When the rite concluded, the eunuchs rose, hollowed yet whole, their identities reborn in service to her. They became living conduits of her will, whispering her commands in foreign courts, delivering scrolls of edicts cloaked in secrecy, and standing guard at her bedside, vigilant and unyielding through the night. Within the secluded precincts of the harem, Theodora introduced her most exquisite cruelty, the transformation rites. Each honored state official, those who once stood with heads held high in the Senate, was summoned under pretense of paying homage. They arrived attired in finery, expecting formal obeisances or platitudes of praise. Instead, they were led into chambered alcoves, where the rituals of Theodora's youth played out in reverse. Soft cushions and flickering torches created an illusion of intimacy. There, they reenacted the very debasements she had once endured in the hippodrome's thrall. They knelt, bound by silken cords, and repeated the gestures of supplication they had once witnessed, her forced to perform before ravenous crowds. In those hushed rites, Theodora remained cloaked in purple velvet. The solitary witness to each man's broken dignity, the echoes of their submission rang in the granite halls, a symphony of shattered pride designed to cement her mastery. These performances were never repeated for the public eye. They existed only in whispers shared between devoted retainers. Yet their psychological impact was profound. A single replay of that ritual could shatter the resolve of the most unflappable senator by forcing them to relive her past degradations. Theodora obliterated any lingering arrogance or defiance. Those who once fancied themselves untouchable were reduced to trembling shells, their eyes hollow with the memory of shame. It was, in Theodora's own words, the final lesson in the art of power control, born not from brute force alone, but from the complete dismantling of one's will to resist. In the stillness before dawn, when the palace lay wrapped in shadows and the eunuchs maintained their silent vigil, Theodora would reflect upon these machinations with a tranquil detachment. She knew that her legacy would be defined by more than statutes or military conquests. It would be etched into the very psyches of those who dared to challenge her. As the first pale light filtered through stained glass windows, she would recline upon silken cushions, sipping a draught scented with rosewater and myrrh, contemplating the next chapter of her dominion. For in the delicate balance of seduction, secrecy, and spectacle, she had discovered an empire far more enduring than stone ramparts. The empire of fear and devotion, ruled from within the hearts of her subjects, where no rebellion could ever find purchase again. Theodora never allowed even a single opportunity to slip through her fingers when it came to gathering intelligence and preserving her dominion. Deep within the palace's gilded wings, she wove a vast network of sexual informants, enlisting members of the nobility who, like herself, had once known the sting of public humiliation. These ladies and lords, bound by shared experience and loyalty, became the empire's most discreet ears, whispering secrets that no official spy could uncover. In the grand banquet halls, under crystal chandeliers, and beside marble columns veined with gold, Theodora hosted sumptuous feasts that masked her true intent. Beneath tables heaped with exotic fruits and platters of spiced game, she planted entrancing courtesans and bewitching pages. Cloaked in the guise of dancers, they mingled with senators and generals, trailing silken sashes across slender shoulders and offering scented flutes of wine. Every subtle glance, every hushed confession, even the soft brush of fingertips against trembling lips, was meticulously recorded. The palace scribes translated these observations into coded scrolls, stored in locked chests guarded by eunuchs, whose loyalty was as steadfast as the walls of Constantinople itself. The pages contained entries such as "prefers jasmine oil at midnight," or faltering voice when discussing private liaisons. Each note a thread in the tapestry of surveillance. Theodora could recall, at a moment's notice, The precise coloration of a noble's fluttering eyelashes, or the faint tremor in a merchant's handshake when temptation crossed his path. When the moment called for decisive action, Theodora released her sexual indictments with the precision of a master strategist. A single anonymous letter, laden with scandalous allegations of incest or coercion, could shatter an opponent's reputation overnight. Courts, predisposed to moral outrage, moved swiftly to impose the harshest penalties. The accused, stripped of title and honor, would find themselves convicted by their own desires, their private indulgences laid bare before an unforgiving public. In Theodora's political calculus, carnal shame proved a far more potent weapon than swords or catapults. It bent the wills of even the most hardened warriors and silenced the mouths of proud aristocrats. Her adversaries learned to cower at the mere whisper of Theodora's list. A spectral ledger said to contain names of every notable who had succumbed to hidden lusts. By the time anyone realized the threat, the verdict was already sealed, the sentence carried out, and the throne's security assured. Yet in tandem with this ruthless machinery, Theodora maintained the facade of benevolence through her so-called Convent of Repentance, located on a secluded plateau overlooking the Sea of Marmara. Its whitewashed walls and fragrant gardens promised sanctuary to wayward girls rescued from brothels and impoverished theatres. The public heard tales of compassion and salvation, of former entertainers learning to spin wool and pray in silent halls. Inside, however, the sisters of the convent found themselves enmeshed in another form of servitude. Their days began before dawn, with hours of chanting prayers echoing beneath vaulted ceilings. They spent mornings at looms, weaving tapestries of modest design, and afternoons in cell-like quarters, studying scripture by single candles. Gates that once promised escape now barred any return to the world they had fled. Guards patrolled cloistered corridors, enforcing a regimen of discipline so strict that some women, unable to endure the relentless routine, chose despair over the promise of redemption. Theodora's dual approach, exploiting the most intimate desires of the elite while presenting herself as the ultimate arbiter of repentance, created a paradox that few could reconcile. She was both the architect of humiliation and the merciful savior who offered a path to spiritual rebirth. In her eyes, this dichotomy was no contradiction, but a reflection of life's complexity. Sin demanded both punishment and absolution, and power required the skill to navigate both. As twilight settled over Constantinople, casting the domes and minarets in the soft glow of dusk, Theodora would retire to her private apartments. There, surrounded by scented oils and silken pillows, she reflected on the day's triumphs. Her mind drifted over the encoded missives, detailing noble indiscretions, the silent tears shed in cloistered cells, and the shifting allegiances among courtiers too fearful to defy her. With a contented sigh, she allowed herself a moment of quiet victory, knowing that every secret desire she had laid bare, and every vow of penance she had enforced, was another measure of her unchallenged sovereignty. In the hush of the imperial night, the empire slept, its rulers pacified by public virtue or private terror, and its former outcasts bound in a convent that mirrored the palace's rigid order. And high above it all, Theodora Augusta reigned supreme, her power woven from the very fabric of human longings, her legacy sealed by the delicate balance of shame and salvation. Theodora's mastery of power extended beyond politics and ritual. She even wielded gender itself as a tool of dominion. In the heart of the imperial court, she issued an edict that sent ripples through the marble corridors. All male dignitaries were henceforth to attire themselves in garments traditionally reserved for women. Stately senators donned gowns of silken rose and pale lavender, their collars trimmed with lace that whispered against their throats. Court painters applied kohl around their eyes and brushed rouge upon their cheeks, transforming once stern visages into delicate canvases of colour. Each morning, these men emerged from their chambers as living tableaux, a procession of soft hues and gentle curves that stood in stark contrast to the rigorously trained female generals and magistrates who surrounded them. These women, handpicked by Theodora herself, embodied a formidable blend of martial prowess and administrative acumen, clad in frocked tunics, reinforced with steel plates. They drilled in the courtyard at dawn, mastering spear and shield under the watchful eye of veteran tutors. By midday, they convened in the council hall, where their voices, clear and unflinching, guided discussions of law and strategy. In Theodora's court, the roles of protector and penitent were reversed. Men wore the trappings of vulnerability, while women carried the burden of authority. The twisted elegance of this arrangement served a dual purpose. On the surface, it appeared as a celebration of female empowerment, an unprecedented elevation of women to positions of command. Beneath that veneer, however, lay a message of total control. Theodora decreed that gender was merely a performative veil, not the immutable core of one's being. Gender is a stage costume, she would declare, in her soft, weary cadence. A garment we don, only so that others may believe what they see. The men, now masked in the guise of femininity, found themselves stripped of the traditional privileges that had once shielded their egos. They felt the sting of vulnerability in every satin fold and every line of rouge. As the days passed, the courtiers grew accustomed to the sight of pale lances of hair cascading from behind jewels, and the sight of broad-shouldered men stepping lightly in slippers embroidered with pearls. But with familiarity came humiliation. Where once they had stood tall in their leather cuirasses, their identities now felt suspended upon a hairpin's point, ever at risk of collapse. The women of the court, by contrast, strode with a confidence sharpened by Theodora's trust. They learned to wield quills with the precision of swords and deliver commands with the calm authority of seasoned commanders. Those who dared question the edict found themselves ensnared by its implications. A single word of dissent threatened to betray weakness, an admission that one could not survive. The new order, as rumours spread of a councilman discovered sobbing beneath his silk robe, or a general's trembling hand as he signed a decree in fuchsia ink. The realization dawned to oppose Theodora was not merely political suicide, but a public disgrace so total that no plea could ever erase it. Even the clergy, whose authority once soared above temporal rule, were drawn into the tapestry of her design. Bishops, robed in embroidered stoles, were instructed to preach on the fluidity of form, extolling the virtues of sacred adaptability. Their sermons, once filled with fierce declarations of divine order, shifted to gentle parables of transformation, how the caterpillar emerges in new form, how the river wears many faces, yet remains itself. Parishioners listened from pews lined with cushions of mauve silk, their prayers hushed under gilded arches. In every whispered communion, Theodora's philosophy took root that nothing in this world is fixed, except the will of the one who commands the stage. By the time dusk settled over the city's domes, painting the skyline in muted plum and charcoal, the city's elite bore the signs of Theodora's triumph. Their gestures, once grand and sweeping, now carried a softness at the edges, a tremor born of the knowledge that the very essence of their being was subject to her whim. They had sacrificed not only their masculine dignity, but also the comforting illusion of autonomy. And while the female magistrates and warrior commanders maintained their steely composure, their every word, every movement, resonated with the silent promise to cross Theodora was to challenge the very definition of self. In the hush before sleep, as candle flames guttered and palace, eunuchs kept their silent vigil, Theodora would reflect on the day's performance. She traced the folds of her violet robes with slender fingers, her voice, a soft murmur, echoing through her private chambers. We wear the masks that history gives us, or we seize the threads to stitch our own. With that gentle proclamation, she drifted into dreams, untroubled by the upheaval she had wrought. Secure in the knowledge that her empire rested not upon walls of stone, but upon the delicate art of perception itself, Theodora kept a secret daughter, born during the years when she trod the perfumed stages as an actress. The child was reared in isolation within the palace's hidden chambers. Never shown to the public, tutors schooled her in the subtle arts of psychological manipulation, how a single question, posed with feigned innocence, could unravel a man's deepest fears, how a measured silence might coax confessions from trembling lips. By adolescence, the girl had become both Theodora's confidant and her keenest spy. During private audiences, she sat beside an unsuspecting nobleman, her wide eyes reflecting his every furtive glance. Afterwards, the child would report every whispered desire, every hushed regret, allowing Theodora to plant seeds of dread in her suitor's heart. Archival notes speak of a banquet in which Theodora introduced her daughter as a gift from the gods, inviting a high-ranking senator to escort the girl to her place at the table. The senatorial escort, honored yet perplexed, offered gentle compliments. Theodora, observing from her elevated seat, raised a single finger, and the child recounted his whispered boasts of conquest, words spoken only once. In confidence, the senator's face drained of color as the room fell silent. In that moment, the daughter's presence became a living testament to Theodora's reach, a reminder that no secret remained safe, and that even the most privileged could be laid bare. Simultaneously, Theodora exerted total control over the empire's official communications. Every royal edict, every legal decree, was painstakingly composed to cast her as the benevolent protector of women. Scrolls unfurled in grand processions proclaimed the Empress's divine mandate to uplift the humble and shield the vulnerable. Monastic scribes, under subtle pressure, revised the chronicles of the realm to elevate her deeds and erase her critics. Where once a general's victory over the Persians might have occupied the annals, now the narrative shifted to extol her charitable works, the founding of orphanages, the distribution of grain to widows, the defense of monastic convents. Meanwhile, any rival who dared rise in the official histories found themselves cast in shadow. Names associated with dissent were expunged or sullied by innuendo regarding lost chastity or breaches of honor. Hymns composed in her praise-filled cathedral choirs, their soaring melodies weaving Theodora's image into the hearts of the faithful. Even foreign envoys, upon arrival, were presented with lavishly illustrated volumes depicting her as a saintly figure haloed in gold leaf, beneath which lay the laconic footnote, "Guardian of women's dignity." In city squares, heralds trumpeted her virtues in declamatory cries. "Behold, the Empress, whose mercy outshines the sun." Yet behind such proclamations lay a meticulously orchestrated performance. Rebel pamphlets or private letters that criticized her policies were intercepted and rewritten, appearing later as paeans to her wisdom. The populace, lulled by constant praise, came to accept her portrayed image as immutable truth, and those who remembered earlier versions of events, officers whose promotions were revoked, courtiers whose honors were quietly stripped, learned that to contradict the official line was to risk ignominious erasure. As twilight deepened over Constantinople, Theodora's daughter would retreat to her secluded chamber, her small desk lit by a single flickering lamp. There, she catalogued the day's discoveries, a whispered confession in the royal gardens, a merchant's veiled threat at a feast, a bishop's momentary lapse in reciting the creed. Each entry, tenderly penned, fed into Theodora's vast intelligence network. And when the Empress reviewed these reports at dawn, she did so with a serene satisfaction, knowing that every word published across the empire, every decree uttered by the heralds, and every record preserved by the scribes, served her purpose. In the hush of morning, when the city stirred beneath rosy skies, Theodora would recline upon her silken cushions, her secret daughter by her side. Together, they listened to the distant bell towers, toll, marking hours of vigilance and prayer. The Empress, her voice soft and dreaming, would murmur, "History itself is our stage. And truth is, but the script we choose to perform, and so, within those gilded walls, Theodora's power held firm, shaped by the cunning interplay of child and chronicle, an empire bound by whispers and woven from shadows. She exploited the fierce schism between the Orthodox and the Monophysites as yet another lever of power. In every corner of the empire, the debate over Christ's nature raged like wildfire, consuming clergy and laity alike. Yet Theodora, ever pragmatic, aligned herself with the Monophysites, not out of genuine devotion, but to cast herself as their protector. She dispatched envoys bearing gifts of gold-embroidered vestments and precious relics to Monophysite bishops in remote regions, pledging imperial patronage. In return, those prelates swore fealty to her, instructing their congregations to pray for the Empress's health and wisdom. By championing a persecuted minority, Theodora wove a web of loyalty that extended from the great basilicas of Constantinople to the desert monasteries of the Nile's edge. Through these alliances, she gained eyes and ears where the uniformed legions could not reach. Village priests, once suspicious of imperial meddling, now welcomed her couriers with whispered thanks, believing that Theodora's favour would shield them from the harsh decrees of Constantinople's Orthodox hierarchy. In regions where the desert wind carried only silence, her name became synonymous with refuge. Mothers taught their daughters to recite blessings for the Empress who lifted our burdens, and simple farmers prayed for her in the fields, under the dappled shade of olive trees. Yet she did not limit herself to orthodox rites of almsgiving. Hidden within the palace's labyrinthine wings lay a darker dimension of worship. There, under vaulted ceilings, painted with ghostly murals of angels and demons, Theodora orchestrated secret ceremonies that blended sacred scripture with the rituals of ancient mystery cults. Priests robed in black stoles intoned psalms in hushed, rhythmic chants, their words punctuated by the soft clink of bronze censers. Among them, courtesans clad in silent veils moved slowly in a dance both solemn and sensuous, their bodies half illuminated by flickering torches. At the center of these rites was a shrine draped in purple silk, where consecrated bread lay upon an altar of polished onyx. The Empress herself would preside, her gaze serene yet inscrutable, as acolytes offered cups of sweet wine spiced with mastic and myrrh. Then, in a gesture that would have sent Orthodox bishops into paroxysms of fear, Theodora would invite a select few of her closest advisors to partake. The communion, once a symbol of spiritual unity, became a bond of complicity. Those who drank from the chalice joined her in a sacred secret, bound by both ritual and fear. As the final notes of psalmody faded, the courtesans emerged from the shadows to anoint the participants' wrists with perfumed oils. The touch, soft as a lover's caress, left behind a faint luminescence in the candlelight, a mark of initiation. From that moment onward, the initiate understood that loyalty to Theodora transcended earthly oaths. They carried within them a fragment of her power, a silent vow, sealed by fragrance and flame. Word of these forbidden ceremonies spread in whispers among the clergy. Ordinary sermons gave way to frantic denunciations from orthodox pulpits. "Beware the shadowed masons of her court," thundered some bishops, who pervert holy mysteries into instruments of dominion. Yet no public investigation followed. Theodora's control of the official annals ensured that any such allegations were buried or rewritten as fervent but misguided zeal. Thus, behind the polished veneer of imperial charity, Theodora maintained a secret sanctuary of power. In those hidden forums, she reaffirmed her supremacy over both state and church, proving that true authority lay in the mastery of mystery. By day, she was the Empress, beloved of the pious and protector of the oppressed. By night, she was the adept of an arcane order, binding the souls of her intimates with equal measures of faith and fear. And so, As the city of Constantinople slumbered beneath the watchful gaze of its minarets, Theodora's hidden liturgies pressed onward in silent triumph, solidifying her place not only in history, but in the very hearts of those who served her in the dark. In her final years, Theodora's mind grew restless with paranoia. Convinced that enemies lurked beneath every marble threshold, she commissioned a network of subterranean tunnels beneath the great palace. Stone archways led to hidden chambers, lit by phosphorescent lamps forged from ground alabaster. Within these silent corridors, she believed she could escape plots hatched in the Senate and betrayals whispered by court eunuchs. Guards posted at narrow passageways carried finely wrought lanterns and spears tipped with silver, while the echo of their footsteps formed a constant reminder of the Empress's vigilance. Simultaneously, Theodora became obsessed with the promise of eternal youth. She summoned conjurers and court physicians, men reputed to have travelled to distant lands in pursuit of alchemical secrets. In the palace laboratories, vats of mercury mud swirled with lentil-thick consistency, and attendants coated her skin in its shimmering slurry. On other days, she drank waters infused with crushed jade and powdered emerald, each sip accompanied by a prayer that her complexion might never betray the passage of time. Apothecaries recorded each concoction in hushed scribbles, their parchment stained by drops of aromatic oils and ink, while Theodora slept fitfully under canopies of violet silk. Yet the toll on her body became undeniable. The mercury baths left her skin raw and sensitive. Her hands trembled with a ceaseless quiver. The emerald elixirs brought on bouts of fever, and she would lie in shivering fits beneath her canopy, her breath shallow as the eunuchs administered cooling poultices. By midday, when the sun shone through stained glass windows and gilded mosaics flickered with light, Theodora's chamber remained dark and silent. The once commanding voice that had rallied armies and dictated laws now spoke only in whispers to her closest attendants, begging for yet another draught that promised a taste of immortality. As Theodora withdrew into her underground sanctuaries and her arcane treatments consumed her days, state affairs languished. Emperor Justinian, once guided by her keen counsel, found himself relying heavily on trusted eunuchs and loyal palace officials. These silent officers, trained in intrigue and administration, filled the void left by Theodora's absence from the council hall. They drafted edicts, convened tribunals, and managed the grain dole, all under Justinian's weary oversight. Yet court life became suffused with suspicion, for courtiers never knew when their own appointments might be reshuffled by Theodora's unseen hand or by the eunuch's careful manipulations. In the late spring of the year 548, Theodora's fragile body finally succumbed to the relentless strain of her experiments. On the 28th day of June, beneath the vaulted marble arches of her private chapel, she breathed her last. The once vibrant empress, whose laughter had echoed through palace corridors and whose tears had been shed in private moments of sorrow, slipped away with a serene sigh. News of her passing coursed through Constantinople like a silent wave, leaving a city caught between relief and mourning. Justinian, stricken by loss, refused all pleas to take another wife. His nights grew longer, and his once firm gait became stooped with grief. In public ceremonies, he draped himself in deep violet robes and wore a thin gold circlet as a token of perpetual union. Court festivities dwindled, replaced by somber commemorations of Theodora's life. Monks chanted liturgies in her honor, and processions carried her portrait, framed in white lilies and flickering candles, down the wide avenues of the capital. Theodora's legacy remained as contradictory as her reign. On one hand, she had founded monasteries that sheltered orphans and women, enacted laws that protected widows from injustice, and championed the right to divorce for those in abusive marriages. These deeds were inscribed in the legal codes that endured long after her death, providing a measure of relief to countless women across the empire. On the other hand, she left behind a court stained by fear and suspicion, a place where secrets were currency and truth was a casualty. Her subterranean tunnels stood empty, a testament to her mistrust, while her failed elixirs lay in broken flasks, reminders of her desperate pursuit of the impossible. In memory, Theodora remains the embodiment of paradox. She was both savior and tyrant, healer and tormentor, saint and sinner. Her portrait, depicted in mosaics and manuscripts, shows a woman of striking beauty and an inscrutable gaze that seems to peer beyond the viewer's soul. Scholars continue to debate her motives. Was she a champion of the oppressed who harnessed cruelty to achieve justice? Or a ruler consumed by her own insecurities, lashing out at a world she believed perpetually unfaithful? As the centuries passed and the dust of history settled upon her tomb, Theodora's story endured not as a clear moral lesson, but as a haunting testament to the complexity of power. She proved that compassion and cruelty can dwell in the same breast, that salvation can be wielded as a weapon, and that the quest for immortality often leads to mortal ruin. In the hushed halls of the great palace, her memory lingers, like a half-remembered dream, beautiful, disturbing, and forever enigmatic. A lullaby to the weary soul that whispers of both hope and dread. Theodora continued to expand her intelligence apparatus, drawing in not only the women she had rescued, but also carefully selected palace eunuchs and royal guards. These men were chosen for their discretion, castrated to remove any loyalty beyond their devotion to her, and trained in the arts of observation and clandestine reporting. They became her eyes and ears throughout the sprawling court, in every audience with petitioners, in every lavish banquet hall. They listened for subtle murmurs behind veils, watched for furtive glances exchanged across tables, and recorded every nuance in their folded scrolls. Each note was sent by secret courier to Theodora's private chambers, where she read them under the glow of violet lamps, piecing together a living map of intrigue. Concurrently, Theodora maintained her cadre of stone throwers in hiding agents, tasked with sowing rumors and distributing slanderous pamphlets about her political adversaries. These whisperers circulated twisted anecdotes among the court's salons and corridors, insinuating improper alliances or improprieties of character. No public accusation was necessary. The rumor mill did its work. Once a nobleman found himself compelled to defend his own honor, the Empress unleashed a wave of damning testimonies, extracted from shadowy informants, that ensnared him in a web of scandal. By the time a formal edict of condemnation arrived, he was already a broken man. His family's fortunes seized, his titles stripped, and his name public property. The strategy allowed Theodora to neutralize opponents without entering into tedious legal battles. The machinery of blame turned swiftly, leaving no time for her enemies to catch their breath. Beyond intrigue and rumor, Theodora exploited the pageantry of court ceremonies themselves as subtle traps for the unwary. From the grand accession rite to the ephemeral flower festival, she orchestrated events that blended opulence with peril. At a banquet held in the memory hall, courtiers reclined on embroidered cushions beneath threads of gold. Exotic spices perfumed the air, and dancers in shimmering veils traced sinuous patterns around low tables. Guests believed they had license for indulgence. Wine flowed freely, and laughter echoed against marble columns. Yet the moment a lord of the realm transgressed the delicate code of decorum, an unintended brush of a servant's sleeve, a whispered jest about palace politics, he was later summoned before a tribunal. There, in a chamber lined with purple draperies, officials weighed his deeds against Theodora's newly reformed legal code in a cold equation. Sexuality plus status equaled slander. No pretense of impartial justice clouded the proceedings. A single misstep, recorded by the ever-watchful eunuchs and whispered by the stone throwers, condemned even the most powerful to disgrace. Amidst these public spectacles, Theodora wielded her private records of court secrets to draft progressive reforms that, on their surface, painted her as a champion of compassion. She promulgated laws outlawing forced prostitution, ensuring that no woman could be coerced into selling her body. She enhanced women's rights in divorce proceedings, granting them a share of property and custody of their children. She stiffened punishments for sexual violence, elevating offences to capital crimes. These statutes, celebrated in elaborate proclamations held in city squares, bolstered her image as the lady protector of the vulnerable. Statues erected in her honour showed her standing tall, garments billowing, hand outstretched in a gesture of guardianship. Yet, beneath the veneer of benevolence, these same laws served to entrench her covert dominion. When she needed to topple a rival, she invoked the new statutes, accusing him of seducing a minor or coercing a servant. The public, steered by heralds who proclaimed her legal victories as milestones of enlightenment, applauded her courage. Meanwhile, those who published pamphlets opposing her measures found themselves charged with undermining the moral fabric of the empire. Their presses were confiscated, their publishers exiled. In this way, Theodora's reforms became both shield and sword. She protected those she chose to elevate, and she wielded her own legislation to destroy those she deemed threats. Through the combined force of orchestrated ceremonies, a network of devoted spies, and a carefully curated body of laws, Theodora's presence enveloped every facet of imperial life. Her subjects believed they served in an era of unparalleled justice and compassion. Even as they walked a tightrope of fear and obligation, no corner of the palace, no hall of power, no hidden corridor escaped her influence. The echo of her will resonated in every proclamation, and the shadow of her gaze followed every whispered conversation. In the twilight hush of the imperial palace, as courtiers retired to silken chambers and the silver moonlight filtered through oiled windows, Theodora's mind drifted between triumph and caution. She stroked the folds of her lavender robes, contemplating the day's dispatches, the latest trials, and the next grand festival to come, for in her hands, the subtle interplay of public spectacle and private knowledge had become the very lifeblood of her empire, a delicate, dreamlike tapestry spun from intrigue, desire, and the unwavering will of one woman who reigned supreme in the hushed corridors of power. On the religious front, Theodora sought to maintain her ascendancy in the empire's fierce theological debates. She cast her protective mantle over the Monophysite, faithful not out of heartfelt conviction, but as a calculated measure to become their champion. In cities and villages alike, where whispers of Christ's single divine nature threatened to overturn orthodox teachings, her envoys delivered gifts of ornate vestments and chalices of polished silver. In return, Monophysite bishops, grateful for her patronage, pledged unwavering loyalty to the empress. These prelates, once marginalized and hunted, now stood in defiance of the established orthodox hierarchy. Emboldened by Theodora's favor, their elevation to archbishoprics and bishoprics marked a deepening schism. Where once a single patriarch's voice had guided the faithful, now rival centers of power vied for influence in every province of the realm. Through this network of grateful clerics, Theodora extended her reach to the furthest frontiers of Byzantium. Remote monasteries perched on windswept hills, desert oases ringed with date palms, and riverbanks where humble fishermen still rowed wooden skiffs at dawn. In those distant places, her name became synonymous with sanctuary, and banners bearing her emblem fluttered alongside icons of Christ. Yet, while she publicly championed the Monophysites, Theodora's true genius lay in her ability to blend sacred doctrine with the clandestine rites of older, secret cults. Within the palace's claustrophobic depths, she staged her own hidden liturgies, ceremonies that married elements of Christian scripture with arcane symbols, long forbidden by orthodox bishops. Under vaulted ceilings painted with angels and serpents entwined, she presided over rituals in which the faithful knelt upon silken mats of amethyst hue and traced the signs of the cross with trembling fingers. Then, at her signal, masked devotees stepped forward to perform dances that harkened back to pagan mysteries swirling mantles. half-whispered invocations, and the pouring of libations sweetened with honeyed wine. These rites unfolded in candlelit cells, adjacent to the imperial private chapel, so that the ordinary worshippers praying in the main nave remained unaware of the dark pageantry just beyond their reach. For those secret adherents, initiation into Theodora's hidden order forged bonds stronger than any vow of fealty to throne or altar. They emerged from the shadows with a blend of reverence and terror, convinced that the Empress herself wielded powers both divine and forbidden. On the political stage, Theodora's commitment to gender equity appeared revolutionary. She installed women in positions formerly reserved for men, female secretaries whose quills transcribed imperial decrees, women scholars who advised on matters of theology and law, and even a handful of courageous women granted the authority to preside over marital disputes. These appointed magistrates, robed in simple indigo and pearl, heard petitions from humiliated wives, disenfranchised daughters, and betrayed partners. Their verdicts, often favorable to the aggrieved, constituted a radical reshaping of ancient customs. Under Theodora's directive, divorce no longer became an insurmountable stigma. Widows reclaimed dowers with fewer obstacles, and daughters could inherit property alongside their brothers. Parades through the capital, with banners proclaiming Her Majesty, protector of women, cemented the Empress's image as a pioneer of female rights. Yet these reforms served a dual purpose. Each appointed woman became a node in Theodora's growing faction, a circle of dependable allies whose loyalty balanced the traditional power wielded by male generals and senators. Ultimately, Theodora wielded media and legislation as her twin instruments of dominion. In the capital's grand halls, poets and heralds extolled her virtues in epic odes, broadcasting her deeds far beyond the city's stone ramparts. Meanwhile, scribes in the imperial chancery revised existing laws to reflect her philosophy. He who commands faith will command hearts. He who commands hearts will command the state. With this maxim engraved upon golden tablets in the council chamber, her legal reforms took on an air of divine mandate. Decrees outlawing forced prostitution and prescribing severe penalties for sexual violence drew universal praise. Even as officials deployed these statutes against her adversaries, a single allegation of impropriety, publicized through the state's network of messengers, could ruin careers and reputations. Conversely, those who stood by her were lauded as paragons of virtue. Their acts of mercy eloquently chronicled in official yearbooks and illuminated manuscripts. Through the interplay of theology, clandestine ritual, and strategic empowerment of women, Theodora transformed religious strife into political capital. She manipulated public opinion with silver-tongued orators, and she reshaped private beliefs with secret liturgies known only to her inner circle. By turning the very debates that once threatened her rule into the foundation of her authority, she secured her throne against every challenge, whether from scheming courtiers, rebellious bishops, or foreign envoys. In the hush that followed each proclamation, as the empire's banners snapped in the wind and psalms rose from distant monasteries, the truth of her dominion remained that the greatest power lies not in armies or riches, but in mastering the souls of one's subjects. And so, the Empress, who had once danced on the edge of ruin, now stood triumphant, her influence woven into the very fabric of Byzantium's faith and governance, an eternal testament to her indomitable will. In her final years, Theodora's past traumas and the relentless weight of power gradually wore down her spirit. She withdrew farther and farther into the palace's most remote chambers, sealing the heavy doors to her audience halls and accepting only messages delivered through the outer courts. Rumors spread of the subterranean labyrinth she had forged beneath the imperial residence, an intricate web of tunnels and hidden refuges designed to shelter her from imagined coups and conspiracies. Flickering lanterns illuminated secret stairwells, where once there had been open galleries, and eunuch sentinels, draped in ashen silks, patrolled the winding corridors with watchful eyes. The Empress's growing paranoia revealed itself most starkly in her experiments with the promise of eternal life. court apothecaries, summoned at any hour, concocted a bewildering array of elixirs, compounds of crushed gemstones, thick mercury pastes meant for mineral-rich baths, and waters steeped with ivory-scented oils. Each morning, Theodora's nurses whispered of her hesitation before a silver cup, its contents said to hold the secret of unending youth. The physical toll of these treatments became painfully apparent. The Empress grew fragile and pale. Her once commanding presence diminished to a frail silhouette beneath layers of lavender-dyed linen. Royal physicians, their robes stained with tinctures and ink, recorded every symptom in cramped handwriting, trembling hands so weak they could scarcely lift a goblet, flushed cheeks that faded rapidly into ashen grey, laboured breaths that rattled through stiff silk ruffs. Her bed, a structure of carved mahogany swathed in violet damask, became both throne and prison. There, Theodora remained reclined from dawn until dusk, surrounded by vats of cooling balms and trays of obscure powders. Emperor Justinian, who had once shared every counsel and decree with his consort, found himself relegated to distant corridors. His own steps echoed hollowly as he rushed to unread petitions piled before locked doors. Major decisions of state were entrusted to the eunuchs and hoarded by secretaries, producing a court beset by the confusion of two heads, the stoic emperor and his elusive, ailing empress. The wheels of governance creaked under the strain, leaving noble families uncertain of promotions and tax collectors, unsure of quotas. In the silence where Theodora's voice once rang with authority, only the soft rustle of parchment and the hushed whispers of palace officials remained. Contemporary chroniclers noted a profound obsession that consumed Theodora in her twilight days, the eternal return of youth and the perfection of her own beauty. She commissioned court painters to render her likeness in the style of saints, haloed with gold leaf and encrusted with gems, ruby droplets on her brow, emerald tears at the corners of her eyes. Poets composed hymns that praised her radiant complexion, exalting her as dawn's fairest blossom and pearl of Byzantium. Messengers carried these verses throughout the capital, from the marble steps of Hagia Sophia to the crowded markets of the Golden Horn. Each new portrait, more lavish than the last, served to isolate Theodora further from the mortal realm. She admired her own image with a quiet, reverent gaze, as if beholding a deity in mortal form. In galleries of mirrored glass, she would stand transfixed, adjusting a strand of hair or the fold of her silken gown, murmuring praises of her own magnificence. The illusion of limitless power became her sanctuary, a refuge from the encroaching frailty of flesh. Modern historians often interpret Theodora's final descent as evidence of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, manifested in her all-consuming desire for control and her fixation on recapturing lost innocence. From today's vantage point, her paranoia and relentless regime of self-preservation appear as symptoms of a psyche battered by early humiliations and unremitting ambition. Yet through a political lens, these same behaviors constituted a final stratagem to bend every facet of palace life to her own will, ensuring that even in sickness she commanded the province of human agency. The tunnels she had carved beneath the palace were not merely refuges, but a statement of dominion over secret spaces. The elixirs she demanded, no matter how toxic, were testament to her refusal to surrender to time's inexorable march. The portraits she commissioned presented her as timeless, unbound by the decrees of nature. Thus, even as her body failed her, Theodora's legacy of control endured. The palace's hollowed halls and ornate portraits outlived her, reminders that she had mastered fear, desire, and belief itself. When she finally drew her last breath, it was in a room awash with twilight and the faint scent of violet oil. Justinian, unable to bear the void left by her departure, sealed his heart against new attachments. In the years that followed, the empire would rebuild itself, but the memory of Theodora's final act the transformation of vulnerability into the ultimate assertion of power, would echo through Byzantine history as a testament to a woman who would not be undone by the passage of years. And in that enduring paradox of a ruler undone by her own quest for permanence resided the unsettling truth of her reign, that the greatest fortress is the one we build within, and that sometimes the walls of our own making become our final prison. Theodora drew her final breath on the 28th of June in the year 548 Anno Domini, in the quiet hush of her private chapel chambers, as dawn's first light filtered through stained glass windows. Her frail frame lay still upon the silken cushions that had become both cradle and cage. Emperor Justinian, upon learning of her passing, was struck by a grief so profound that he refused all entreaties to take another wife. His heart, bound to hers, in life and in legend, would remain closed to new attachments. Thus, for the remainder of his own days, he steered the vast Byzantine realm, guided by her last edicts and whispered counsel, as if her spirit still lingered beside him in the council hall. In political terms, Justinian remained steadfast in the policies Theodora had championed. He continued to enact and enforce the laws that protected women from exploitation statutes, forbidding forced prostitution, granting equitable divorce rights, and imposing severe penalties for sexual violence. He expanded the network of convents that Theodora had founded, converting ancient villas and neglected monasteries into sanctuaries where widows and orphans found shelter. Grain distributions for impoverished families continued under her name, and public works, projects, roads, aqueducts, and hospitals bore inscriptions commemorating her dedication to the welfare of the vulnerable. These measures, once attributed to her singular vision, now became the pillars of Justinian's own reign, ensuring that her memory lived on in acts of compassion and justice. Yet the echoes of Theodora's darker legacies did not vanish with her last exhalation. The web of spies she had spun throughout the palace endured, woven still by the eunuchs and hand-picked courtiers who had owed their positions and their twisted loyalties to her. They continued to operate in silent corridors, intercepting private letters and monitoring whispered conversations. Secret banquets, where masked guests traded confidences over the soft clink of crystal goblets, persisted in hidden courtyards lit by lanterns and moonlight. The records of these clandestine gatherings, bound in worn leather and locked behind iron doors, remained the insurance policies of those who served her memory. Even as Justinian attempted to reassure the nobility that the empress's reign of intrigue was over, the atmosphere of suspicion clung to the court like morning mist. No one could be certain which confidant still harbored a scrap of Theodora's hidden script, ready to deploy her methods against would-be rivals. In the realm of law, Theodora's most enduring contributions were indelibly inscribed in the Byzantine legal codex. Her reforms protecting women's property rights survived successive revisions, providing legal precedents that echoed through centuries of jurisprudence. Her divorce statutes, which afforded equal standing to wives and husbands, became the foundation for later civil codes. Rape, once a crime belittled in courts, was punished as a capital offence. Its recognition as a grave injustice owed to her relentless advocacy. Legal scholars throughout the empire cited her name as the architect of these changes. Even as they debated whether her motivations had been political necessity or genuine conviction, nonetheless, her statutes stood as milestones in the evolution of Byzantine law, a testament to her impact upon the governance of society and the protection of its most vulnerable members. Culturally, Theodora's visage became one of the era's most recognizable icons. Artists across the empire immortalized her likeness in sumptuous mosaics and frescoes that adorned basilicas, public baths, and city palaces. Nowhere was her image more revered than in the Church of San Vitale at Ravenna, where her figure stands draped in purple and gold. Her crown, a radiant halo of gemmed tesserae. In that mosaic, her countenance is both serene and inscrutable eyes that appear to gaze beyond the viewer, lips set in a gentle, knowing curve, Scholars marvel at the juxtaposition of her sumptuous robes and the placid dignity of her expression, a duality that captures the paradox of her life as both healer and harbinger of dread. The interplay of light and shadow in these artworks mirrors her legacy ceilings, vaulting toward heaven above, while darker tesserae frame her form, hinting at the hidden depths of her dominion. Pilgrims journeyed from far-flung provinces to behold her image, leaving offerings at her feet in supplication for mercy or protection. Even those who recoiled at the tales of her clandestine rituals found themselves drawn into the luminous beauty of her portraits. I forced to reconcile the grandeur of her public persona with the whispers of her secret courts. In the decades that followed her death, the empire occasionally glimpsed the flicker of Theodora's influence. A sudden edict protecting a convent might be attributed to her spirit guiding her widowed consort. A clandestine arrest of a dissident on grounds of moral turpitude bore the fingerprints of her once feared intelligence network. Yet these echoes gradually softened as Justinian aged, and new advisors rose to power. The palace's underground chambers fell to disuse, their passages sealed beneath thick stone slabs. The secret service of eunuchs dwindled, replaced by more transparent systems of governance. Nevertheless, the duality of Theodora's memory endured. In legal treatises, she was lauded as a guardian of justice. In secret chronicles, she remained the master of shadows, a figure both dreaded and venerated. Her mosaics retained the interplay of light and dark, everlasting testaments to a woman who embodied both mercy and menace. And as time drifted onward, her story continued to haunt the annals of history, a lullaby for the weary, cautioning that power, once forged in the fires of suffering, leaves imprints that outlast the life of its wielder, echoing through centuries in the mosaic of human society. Over the course of 2 millennia, Theodora has endured as a figure of profound contradiction. To some, she stands as a pioneering icon of female empowerment, a woman who shattered the rigid confines of her society to secure rights and protections for other women. Modern historians laud her for legal reforms, divorce rights, property protections, severe penalties for sexual violence that bear the unmistakable imprint of her advocacy. To these scholars, Theodora emerges as a compassionate reformer, one whose early sufferings compelled her to champion the vulnerable, yet others condemn her as a merciless despot, a ruler who manipulated desire and wielded cruelty to consolidate her throne. They point to her use of sexual blackmail, secret trials, and psychological torture as the means she chose to maintain an unassailable grip on power. In lecture halls and scholarly journals, the debate rages on: was she a saint of justice or a tyrant in silk, viewed through a psychological lens? Theodora's life exemplifies the interplay between sustained trauma and the development of extreme coping mechanisms. From her earliest years, she was subjected to public humiliation, so profound that the boundaries between performance and violation blurred irreparably. Yet she transformed these very wounds into weapons. Theodora learned that shame can be recast as authority, that the currency of the flesh becomes a means to command submission. Within the labyrinth of her mind, every moment of degradation became a lesson in dominance. But this metamorphosis came at a great cost to her inner freedom. She constructed psychological fortresses of suspicion and control that ultimately became her own prison. In the hush of her subterranean retreats and in the stifling chambers of her palace, she found no solace, only the echo of her own fears. Her story is a classic case of complex post-traumatic stress. The self once broken by cruelty evolves into the perpetrator of cruelty, using extreme measures to shield a psyche already ravaged by bygone horrors. Politically, Theodora demonstrated a deft choreography of religion, sexuality, and justice as the rungs of her ascent. She cleverly exploited theological schisms to carve out a base of loyal Monophysite supporters, then fused those allegiances with clandestine cultic rituals that bound initiates to her will. She orchestrated lavish spectacles of erotic intrigue to unmask her rivals, only to enact legal reforms that masked her maneuvers under a mantle of benevolence. From the shadows of the hippodrome to the dais of the imperial box, she played each instrument with calculated precision. The lesson she imparted is sobering in the arena of power. Pure compassion is a luxury too dangerous to endure. Benevolence, once declared, can be harnessed as a weapon. Opponents who appear willing to return compassion with loyalty may reveal themselves truly only under the pressure of carefully staged trials. In a world where adversaries grow ever more cunning, one must devise layered défense sociale. Legal, psychological, if one is to maintain an unassailable position. Ultimately, Theodora's tale transcends the boundaries of mere historical record. It offers a mirror to every would-be ruler and administrator, posing the agonizing question: who watches the watchman? When the instruments of dominion become internalized, the wielder risks binding herself in the very chains she created. The greatest heights of greatness are always shadowed by darkness, for no one ascends to supreme authority without trampling upon the lives of others. Each step upward treads upon shreds of innocence. Each victory exacts hidden tolls. Theodora's life reminds us that the pursuit of power, however necessary or noble in origin, inexorably breeds its own captor. As the years unfold and new leaders claim their crowns, her paradox remains that the most majestic achievements often cast the deepest shadows, and that in the end, the line between savior and tyrant is the faintest, most elusive of veils. In the soft hush of remembrance, one hears the echoes of her story, a lullaby that invites reflection, warns of hubris, and lingers in the weary mind, like the fading notes of a midnight chime. The story of Theodora is not merely a sequence of splendid historical events, but also a priceless lesson on the nature of power and the value of resilience. First, we see that from the deepest wounds, a person can uncover inner strength. Theodora transformed her shame and suffering into the drive to rise above her circumstances, proving that even in the darkest despair there lies the potential for a powerful rebirth when we learn to acknowledge and transmute our pain. Second, the story shows us that power never springs from a single source. It is built through knowledge, strategy, and the ability to harness every facet: religion, law, psychology as multidimensional tools. By knowing how to employ the right instrument in each situation, a ruler can extend influence beyond physical borders, reaching deep into the hearts and minds of every social stratum. Yet at the same time, Theodora illustrates power's darker side. It can all too easily become a shackle if we allow fear and the desire for control to dominate us. Her paranoia and obsession with eternal youth, her hidden chambers and secret rites, all demonstrate that when power becomes absolute, it devours even or any freedom. This reminds us that constructing checks and balances, whether internal or external, is essential to maintaining a healthy governance. Finally, through this video we learn one overarching truth: history is more than a catalogue of facts. It is a mirror reflecting the real dynamics of power and human psychology. Each rise and fall in Theodora's journey raises questions of morality, the cost of ambition, and the thin line between salvation and domination. As we revisit her path of bloodshed and glory, place yourself in the role of observer. Which path would you choose to balance strength and compassion? And on that path, would you remain mindful enough to avoid becoming a ruler, bound by the very power you wield?